If you're ready to take your destiny into your own hands, you've come to the right place. This is The Bulletproof Entrepreneur, featuring interviews with the most exciting and amazing entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Chi Odogu.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the show today. This episode is brought to you by the Recession-Proof Summit. If you want to learn how to transform your business in order to survive and thrive in the new economy, then this is the #1 virtual summit you will attend in 2018. Featuring over 100 CEOs, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and game changers, the Recession-Proof Summit covers 10 learning tracks and is designed in order to help you succeed in every area of your business. For more details, visit www.odogwu.com. That's www.odogwu.com and sign up for the email list, and you'll get a lot of information concerning what the Recession-Proof Summit is all about and how it can help you succeed and thrive in the future. And without further ado, on with the show. Hey guys, welcome to the show. I have a great guest today. I'm talking to Steve Blue. Steve is one of the preeminent business growth and transformation strategists in the world. He has over 40 years of experience helping companies survive and thrive in almost any business environment. He's the CEO of Miller Ingenuity, a place where he's helped transform a 60-year-old manufacturing company into an international powerhouse. He's a noted keynote speaker, teacher, and board member of several nonprofit organizations. In addition to all that, Steve is the author of several multiple best-selling books, including The Art of Success, which he co-wrote with Jack Canfield, which is coming out this summer, 2017, American Manufacturing 2.0, The $10 Million Employee, and Burnarounds. Now, if you think that's not keeping Steve busy enough, Steve also writes for many publications, including Entrepreneur.com, Success.com, Fortune, Huffington Post, business journals, and a lot more industry publications. He's a highly sought-after consultant that helps businesses change the way they do business in the 21st century. So I'm pleased to have him on the show today to tell us a little bit about his interest, his wisdom, his background, and the art of success, and much more. So without further ado, Steve, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Chi. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Great. So, Steve, let's get I've said a lot about you, and you have over 40 years of experience, which is more than I've been alive, typically. So,
thanks for telling me that.
So, before we get started, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got to where you are today.
Well, as you said in the intro, I'm a business transformation expert, and in the last 40 years, that's not something you just end up doing, unless perhaps you go for a PhD and become a university professor. They seem to think they have a lock on transforming businesses, even though most of them have not done it before. But over the course of 40 years, I've been all over the map of your listeners. Gee, I've been an entrepreneur. I've worked for Fortune 500 companies. I've been an executive. I've done startups and everything in between. And over the years, I got a knack for hunting down problems and fixing them. That's how I got my sort of corporate gunsmanship in a Fortune 500 company 35 years ago. I started as a factory floor supervisor. And I'd look around and I'd see things that were wrong that nobody was fixing, or nobody, because they didn't know how, or perhaps because they didn't want to. A lot of corporate problems are toxic to touch, because if you touch them and you try to fix them and you don't, you sort of get screwed. And so I earned a reputation at what is now Rockwell International. It used to be Allen Bradley Automation, and as a problem solver and a fixer. And so they started sending me all over the world to fix. And so as a result of that, I've seen every kind of problem in a large company and in small companies. I've seen every kind of problem there is, and every kind of department there is, and every function there is, and I know how to fix them. And so over the last 40 years, I got to the point where, I tell people when I do keynote speeches, I say, you don't have a problem that I haven't seen, and you don't have a problem that I haven't already solved. That's sort of how I got my credentials. Then I started writing books about it in the last 3 or 4 years. So actually more than that. My first one, I think, was published in 2009. And as a matter of fact, the latest one that you mentioned in the intro, the Mastering the Art of Success that I co-authored with Jack Canfield, that just came out 2 weeks ago. Okay. And it hit the Amazon bestseller list on day 2.
Oh, wow.
So that's kind of cool. It actually hit 3 lists. It was number 3 in one list. It was number 42 in another list. It was like number 74 on the third list. So that one's kind of taken off like a rocket. What I wrote about primarily in that book, which will be of interest to your listeners, is how a company can transform itself from basically Rust Belt into high tech. I've done it, so so it's not an academic exercise, and that's basically what I wrote about in that book. It's what I call unleashing a company's innovational potential.
Okay. Great. So you mentioned a lot of things there, but I just want to do a quick follow-up before we continue. So when you were sent out as a fixer fixing problems in companies, the skill set that you applied, how did you acquire that skill set? Was it through trial and error, or were there specific books? Or what prepared you for that role, essentially?
Yeah. That's a good question. It's all of the above. First, I was very inquisitive because I was too stupid to know, how things were supposed to be. And so I'd go into an organization and I'd say that the people had been, inertia takes over a company after a while. I'm sure you know this. And just because it's the way it's always been done is the way it's always been done. Nobody questions it. That's why people hire consultants. Yeah. Bring in a different set of eyes. And then the guy says, why the hell are you doing it this way? It's just dumb. And so I was inquisitive and I didn't know any better, which gave me an edge in terms of the other who had looked at these problems. And then secondly, I read a lot of books. I mean, I still do. I probably read two to 4 books a month. I've been to I've read all of Tony Robbins' books. I've read all of Brian Tracy's books. You name them, I've read all their books. And so I was constantly learning. I've been to the firewalk that Robbins does. I think I've done that 5 times. Mm-hmm. And so I had this, kind of, intellectual curiosity, and the other part of it is I wasn't afraid to jump in and take on a problem that nobody else wanted to take on. I had nothing to lose, especially early in my career. It's like I'm a nobody here. Everybody else is a somebody. So I'm going to grab this problem. And if I fail, so what?
That's interesting stuff. So now, as we're talking about this, my mind is racing and thinking, majority of the problems a lot of companies face is when the economy goes down, when there's a downturn in the market. So if there's that type of economic crisis and then the company starts to go down, what do you look for specifically to try and help turn that company around when there's a macro crisis going on?
Yeah. Well, I've been around long enough. I've been through a few of those, right? The most recent was 2008, 2009, arguably depending on when you think we entered it, and that was the worst one since the Great Depression. Then there was a mini one. I can't remember what it was. 2001, 2002. Yeah, something like that. So, but that was a little one. I mean, that wasn't life threatening. One in 2009 was life threatening. A lot of companies never came out on the other side. And in fact, I wrote a piece, I think it was in Forbes, about how to prepare for the next recession. Yeah. Everybody, this is to your question. Everybody that's running a business should be prepared for the next recession because, as we all know, it's not if, it's when. Yeah. And so you have a battle plan in place to say, okay, what's the worst case that can happen? What we did, what I advise other CEOs to say, okay, assume that your top line in a recession will go down to X, and then assume maybe 2 or 3 different brackets, 2 or 3 different levels of what is the absolute worst it could possibly be. And let's assume that's your break even. Okay. It may not be. It may be worse than that, right? But if it's worse than your break even, right. If it's worse than your break even, you're going to go belly up, and you can't do a thing about it. So you start with break even, and then the next best case scenario. So you have 2 or 3 levels that if I hit this level, here are the levers that I'm going to pull, and you can only really pull on operating expenses at that point in time. Yeah. However, what I advise CEOs and business owners say, okay, pull a few more of your discretionary operating expenses than you might need to at that level of sales, and take that money and invest it in a marketing program to pull ahead of your competition, because I assume your competition is hunkering down, covering up, hoping to survive. And now is the time to start your program, your marketing push, and your public relations push, your product push, whatever it is you may have that could surpass them. Now's the time to do that. So when you do come out on the other side of the recession, you're actually stronger than when you went in, and which is entirely possible. I've done it. Most companies and most business owners and CEOs think I can't possibly be stronger after a recession. I can only be weaker. That's a myth.
That's very interesting. So on a follow-up to that, what of a company, okay, let's take, for example, the economy itself is not doing bad, but take, for example, the company started, maybe it's a new startup and they're unprofitable. So what are some of the first steps you would take to turn an unprofitable company into a profitable company in the black?
Well, the old saying is success leaves clues, and problems leave clues too. The first thing I do is I look at what their operating expenses are, where are they spending their money, and do they need to spend it there? A lot of time, startups generally don't have this problem. Startups, they got investors on their breathing down their back, and they have to justify their existence almost every day. They're begging for cash, right? Yeah. So you usually won't find startups that have that are wasting what I'll call wasting operating expense. But when the companies start to get a little bit bigger, they say, well, we really need a human resource person, right? I don't happen to think anybody needs them, but some people do, right?
Yeah.
We need a human resource person, right? And then what happens, they hire a human resource person, and that person goes, I need another guy. I need some help here, right? So maybe I'll hire another guy. Maybe I'll, contract an agency, and so expenses just start to grow and get out of hand, and they're not related to what has to be done right now, which is if you're a startup, and if you're, in the first stage beyond a startup, what has to happen right now is you have to survive, right?
Yep.
You have to make money every single day. You have to be profitable every single day, and if you're what I tell people all the time, you watch the numbers every single day. Don't watch them once a month. Don't watch them once a quarter. Watch them. I know, by the way, every single day what my order intake is at my company. Every single day. If one day goes by where it's like really weird, it was way too high or it was way too low, then I'm asking my sales guys, what the heck happened? And my thesis is if you watch the numbers every day, then you'll make the numbers every week. And if you make the numbers every week, you'll make them every month, and then you'll make them year in, year out. What most small businesses, a lot of larger companies, the mistake they make is they say, it'll be better next quarter.
Yep.
Or it'll be better the quarter after that. Sales guys are great for this. They're perfect for, I won't call it lying, but putting the truth in its best possible light. It'll be fine next quarter. As far as I'm concerned, and I love the ones that say, we're going to be okay in the long haul. Well, in the long haul, we're all dead. So that's why I say you got to keep your eyes. You got to keep your eyes on the numbers every single day. And when the numbers start going south, you have to dig in right now, find out why they went south, and fix it. And that'll either be because your competition started taking some of your business, or your customers started to cut back, or structurally the market's soft, or you're spending too much money. It can't be any more than one of those 3 or 4 choices. And then you do something about it.
So now, in your career as a consultant and a troubleshooter that went around fixing companies before, or even while you're still a CEO running a big business, what are some of the toughest calls you've had to make in business?
Well, they're generally people calls because they carry the most risk. If you do them incorrectly, from a liability point of view, if you're going to take out a sales guy, as an example, he might go over to your competition. And even though he's not supposed to tell your secrets, he might. And so the toughest calls have generally been at executive level sales positions. You have to go. Of course, you have to be at the point where you've been fair to the person, meaning you've counseled them on, here's my problem, here's what you need to do, here's how you need to fix, and all that kind of stuff. But you also have to be fair to the company. What I found is most executives, they take personnel actions way too late. They let people hang on longer than they should but usually because they're afraid to talk. They're afraid to confront the person. And
why
so those are tough. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And why is it so hard for executives to actually have those difficult conversations with personnel?
I don't know. I mean, they're uncomfortable in anybody's world. When I do them, and I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of them. They're uncomfortable in anybody's world, but generally, and particularly if you're from the Midwest and other parts of the United States where people are like nice people, it's people are afraid of conflict.
Okay.
It makes them uncomfortable. They haven't been trained in how to deal with conflict. They're not experienced in dealing with conflict, and so they think if they just avoid it, it goes away. Of course, it never, very seldom does. That's the other thing I tell people who, one of my favorite subjects is teamwork. Everybody loves teamwork. Teamwork is like the thing, man. Everybody's got to have teamwork. But few companies do. Some do, but most don't. Because the whole notion that there's a lot of myths surrounding teamwork, and one of them is that teams are free. One of the biggest myths is that teams are free of conflict or should be free of conflict. And it's exactly the opposite. Teams should have conflict. You want conflict in a team because the best decisions, the best revolutions, the best product innovations all come from conflict, not from everybody sitting around saying, "Oh yeah, right, man, that's cool. I like that. Yeah, okay. What else are we going to talk about?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you have to teach the team conflict resolution skills. You say to them, not only is conflict okay, I expect you to have conflict. You're not doing your job if you don't have conflict. But here are the conflict resolution skills that you will need to have productive, constructive conflict that produces a desirable outcome instead of people just being mad at each other.
Yeah. And I think what I'm getting from that is basically thinking of the way families are structured. You can't have a family without people quarreling and fighting. Like a husband and wife will have conflict arguments, but they also resolve the arguments. Siblings all the time fight and they resolve the arguments. So why would you expect you get to work and then you don't have any arguments and you don't have any problems?
That's right. It's everywhere. It's in the church. It's in the schools. It's in your workplace. You go to the grocery store and there's conflict going on there. The meat cutter doesn't want to do this. The checkout counter wasn't nice to you. It's everywhere. So one of the most important skills anybody in business can have is to know how to deal with conflict in a constructive way. So both sides of it come out of the conflict feeling that like it was okay and it was productive.
Right. So now, in manufacturing, which is where you've spent the bulk of your career, manufacturing companies these days, especially around the world, even in America, are struggling right now. The rise of technology, AI, 3D printing, and all that. How can several manufacturing concerns, whether they're older, like you took over a 60-year-old company, I believe, was it 60 years old when you took it over, or it's up to 60 years old now?
It's up. I think I've been doing this with this company for 18 years. So it was probably like 40 when I took it over. Now it's 60.
Oh, okay. So how can manufacturers start thinking about adapting for the future, given so much change and upheaval is going on right around their feet?
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, I wrote a piece. I don't know if Entrepreneur Magazine will write it, but they asked me to do a byline after they saw my Mastering Success book. And basically, the byline was about that very question. And if you're a manufacturer right now, your competition is not the Chinese. Oh, you may be competing with the Chinese. They have cheaper labor, and they have an advantage in currency manipulation, all that kind of stuff. And you may be competing with them, but they're not your competition. And what you just said a minute ago and that's basically robots and artificial intelligence. That's the competition for everything right now. I mean, the name of it's a machine learned artificial intelligence thing that just beat the grandmaster at some Chinese. The name escapes me, but
Watson? Is it Watson?
No, it wasn't Watson. I'm aware that it was the next generation one that's now you could do call centers with. It's a her. You can do calls. She can do call centers with her, and that one particular AI entity alone is expected to disrupt like some ungodly number of jobs in the next 10 years, like 10 million or something.
Wow.
And then if you look at all the experts that predict what's going to happen with AI and machine learning and robots, is just to give you one example, I tell companies that if you think you're immune to this disruptive force, you should know that AI and robots are going to replace surgeons by the year 2050. Now, if they can, sure, they got the call centers and the easy stuff right now, and you can put a robot in the factory and they can weld and all that good stuff. But if they're going to disrupt surgeons by 2050, you better start believing that they could disrupt whatever your company is doing. And so the guy that has the robot and has the AI takes your business, right? Because you don't. So every manufacturing company, especially the lower technology companies, they have to retool themselves to be higher technology. And there's quite a wide range of how high technology you want to get. The higher technology that you want to get, the more you can have protected intellectual property. The higher the margins are, the harder it is for people to compete against you. And of course, it's more expensive to play in that space, but any company can do it. And every company, in fact, my 5th book will be out by January. It's called Metamorphosis, from Rust Belt to High Tech in the 21st Century World, where I lay out the exact formula for how to do this. But basically, it's an 8-step process. I don't know how much time do you have for this part of it?
Oh, no, we can talk. It's up to you.
Okay.
We can use the whole
I'll go over this.
Yeah.
I said, entrepreneur asked me to write a byline. Who knows if they'll publish it or not? They may not. But basically, what I laid out in this byline is the 8 steps that a company can take to become to unleash what I call their innovational potential. And the first step is, as the CEO, the CEO has to put a stake in the ground that says, no matter what, we're going to devote the time and the resources to unlock our innovation potential. Because if the CEO is not on board, completely committed and all that, it'll just be, it'll just die in the vine. It just won't go anywhere. And that's where it stops. Where it starts. And so the CEO then needs to gather all the troops, say, here's what we're going to do. Here's why we're going to do it. Here's why we need to do it. And most people, when he does, I can tell you because I've been through this. So this is not an academic exercise for me. When you do that, the people are going to look at you and think, you're crazy. Are you crazy? We're dumb metal and rust company, and we could never be anything else. We don't want to be anything else. We don't need to be anything else. And you'll get this not only from your employees, but you'll get it from your boards and your shareholders too. Because generally, employees and shareholders and boards like nice, cushy, predictable, nothing ever changes worlds, right? Yeah. Predictable earnings, predictable outcomes, let's not rock the boat. And the example that I use all the time of a company that recognized that it couldn't stay that way is Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, Encyclopedia Britannica now has more revenue by far from their digital sales than they ever had with their print sales. They recognized way back when that, whether we like it or not, paper's going away. You got Wikipedia, you got Google. And if we don't get into the digital world, we just won't survive. And their shareholders could have blocked that and could have said, no. We don't believe you. We don't think that's going to happen. If it does happen, it's far into the future and all that kind of stuff. The same stuff you always get. Or they could have made another choice, but they made the choice of making the conversion and going into high tech. Yeah, it's not a manufacturer, but you see the point. They could have made a different choice. They could have said, no, we're going to harvest the business we've got. We're going to cut operating expenses to the bone, and when this puppy dies, which is a choice that can be made. Shareholders can make that choice. They didn't. And so when the CEO stands up in front of the whole crowd and says, here's what we're going to do, he's going to get a lot of disbelief. He's going to get a lot of naysaying. He's going to get a lot of people say, you don't need to do this and just shut up and go away. But anyway, that's where it has to start. So then secondly, you need to find out, if you want to become an innovative company, you have to find out how innovative you are right now. So you have a baseline. And so you bring in a creativity expert and you do a survey of the entire company. And these skills and these traits can be measured by a professionally engaged survey. And I tell CEOs all the time, you may find out your company's a little more creative than you thought. And they may not be using the creativity because human resources says you can't, or because the engineering department says, no, that's what we do, not you. Who knows? But you start there, and then you know where your gaps are in terms of where you want to be in terms of creativity and where you currently are. Usually where that gap is, Chi, is people don't even know the basic fundamental of the creativity, which is brainstorming.
Wow.
That's usually where you start. People don't know how to do that. Now if you go into the Silicon Valley or you go into Austin, of course, they're brainstorming all over the place. They're doing it at the ping pong tables and the whiteboards, but Rust Belt and old line manufacturers, they don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So that's usually where you start. And brainstorming is so important because that's where you get all the ideas. And, 99% of all brainstorming ideas aren't worth it. That 1% is, but the most important thing is you can't implement an idea that you never had.
Yeah.
Third step is you give people the time to do it. See, what happens is if the CEO doesn't mandate it, people will go, all right, we got to do brainstorming. We'll do that after the real work gets done because we got to make the donuts first.
Yeah.
Well, and what happens is there's never any time for innovation. The innovation works. So the CEO has to say, hey, guys, you need to do both. Okay. I get that, but boss, don't expect me to spend 8 hours making the donuts and then an hour innovating and brainstorming on my own time because the donuts still got to get done, right?
Yeah.
And that's true. So what I do and what I did is I said, you got to give them a number. I said, I expect you to spend 20% of your time doing this, and I'm going to hire 20% more people so the work still gets done.
Okay.
And that's a big commitment. You have to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it'll never happen. And the fourth step is you make a space. You build a space for people to actually innovate in. Now, in the beginning stages, at least in my company, people were brainstorming anywhere they could, in the factory, in the lunchroom, and all that. And then one day they came to us after a few years of this, said, we could do better if we had this, this isn't exactly how they expressed it, Chi, but this is what they meant. If we had this cool, high-tech space conducive to innovating, we could do better than we're doing right now. So I built them. I put it right in the middle of the factory.
That's your creation station, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I call it a Google-like campus in the middle of the factory. It's as high-tech gets. And so you fast forward when we started this 3 or 4 years ago, fast forward today, excuse me, anytime you want to walk back there, you'll see people innovating and brainstorming. In the beginning, after we taught them how to brainstorm and innovate, we'd have to say, here's a problem I want you to work on, here's when I want you to work on it, and here's who I want to work on. Now they decide all that on their own.
Wow. So it gave them empowerment and it gave them autonomy to do the work.
Complete autonomy and empowerment. And while we're on that subject, you have to have the right people that want to do that and are able to do that.
Yep.
So you have to hire the right people, and you have to lead them correctly and all that kind of stuff, which is another part of the issue. But here's the hard part, and this is why it's important to have the right people. Everybody says, "Oh man, I would love to be a self-directed guy. I'd love to, be innovative and creative and sitting around thinking about stuff and all that." But a lot of employees check their brains at the door, and that's where they want to leave them. Sounds appealing to be in this creative atmosphere, but there's accountability for that too. And some people just aren't going to want to re-engage their brains and do more than the position description requires. And if you're going to go down this road, you have to say goodbye to those people.
Yeah.
Train them, coach them, encourage them, and all that kind of stuff. But if they don't want to come along with the program, they have to go. And then the last part really is so important is you got to recognize, reward, and reinforce this process. And what we do is every time my team comes up with a creative idea, I bring the whole company together and celebrate. And I bring a professional photographer in. She takes a picture of the team that had whatever the idea was. And then we put it, we take a whole page 4-color ad out in the local newspapers featuring them and their accomplishments, and you wouldn't believe how powerful that is, because their neighbors say, "Hey, man, I saw you in the paper yesterday. Wow, that's really cool stuff." The motivational power of that's unbelievable. But like my old Uncle Jim used to say, if money isn't number one, I don't know what number two is. And so, you can talk intrinsic rewards until you're blue in the face, but without the money side, you're only giving people half the equation. So every time we have a team that does something that cool, we give each one of them a crisp $100 bill while we're making the presentation.
And when you're doing this recognize, reward, and reinforcement, I would get the feeling that the team bringing the innovation, are they restricted to one team, or is it several different teams? Because people could start getting, jealous and having some bad feelings if they keep seeing the same team over and over again. Some people might not just want to be competitive and say, hey, you know what, if those guys can do it, we need to come up with something too.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chi, because that can cut both ways. I mean, on the one hand, when people that didn't get it see people that get it, they go, well, maybe I need to work a little bit harder. Maybe I need to look a little cooler, or maybe I'll find a way to sabotage the next time this bunch tries to act so swift. Yeah. You know what I mean? It could go either way if you're not really careful about it. But let me give you an example. This is why culturally you have to have a solid foundation of teamwork, because teams don't really care, in the entire company. Well, let me back up a minute. We have a certain set of values in our company that we hold very dearly, and it's not just what I call bumper sticker values. It's just not slogans on the boardroom wall. They're living, breathing values. And about every quarter, we give somebody an award for exhibiting one of those and displaying and living and breathing those values. And the bosses don't make the determination as to who gets the award. Employees do. Okay. And so they decide who gets this value award today. It could be integrity, could be excellence, could be commitment, could be any of them. Employees decide that, they nominate, they vote it, and so they're all interested in and it's amazing. These values, I'll give you an example. About 80% of the workforce votes on these values, and they're nominating each other. Wow. The guy that won it was nominating the guy that didn't win it, and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of culture and cultural foundation you have to have for this sort of thing to work. But the other point I'll make is the CEO has to be very careful that make sure there aren't what I call cool kids. Yep. And not cool kids, right? And I remember when I was in high school, I was not one of the cool kids, and I didn't like the cool kids at all. You know what I mean? Same here. Yeah, well, so you know what I'm talking about. And so, I was hoping those cool kids just come tumbling right down, and that's the kind of dynamic that happened in the workforce if you're not careful. So when we give an award for a creative idea, we make sure we recognize everybody else that was working on other ideas. And we always make sure that we don't have a position or a perspective by people that these are the cool kids and the rest of them are not. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's very hard when a team or an executive group decides to pick one or two stars and focuses on them to the detriment and to the neglect of the rest of the team, because that just breeds. I mean, I can't tell you, my old company, we had a similar situation, and it was just a terrible thing to witness, where you have a few people getting some of the shine and then the rest of the people are just being neglected. So
it's horrible, and you raise a good point. I remember one time that I was asked to save a division in a company a couple of companies back, and basically this is why you don't want to do skunk works, right? Because everybody wants to kill the skunk works people because they're the cool kids. And we were basically a skunk works, and we were the only ones that were developing new products, and we just had one bang up hit after another, and then we got arrogant. We're the cool kids and you're not. And eventually my entire division in that company got eliminated. I was given a parachute, but I got eliminated too. And it wasn't. And so you think, how's that happen? You're doing all the product development and making all the cool stuff, and all of a sudden they get rid of you? Of course they do, because of what you just said.
Interesting. So now,
no skunkers.
Yeah. So
Never do a skunk works.
So before we transition towards the final wrapping up questions for the show, there's something I read somewhere in an article you wrote where you said something about companies should build and create a Cirque du Soleil kind of organization. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, you've seen Cirque du Soleil, I presume.
No, I've seen it on TV, but I've not been there live.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is better when I do this live because I can demonstrate what I'm saying. And I love doing Cirque du Soleil stories when I'm in front of an audience. But what do you have with Cirque du Soleil, right? You have a group of performers who are highly motivated, highly engaged, highly energized, and they come to work every day with a specific intent of to do better than they perform better today than they did yesterday, yep. Right? Yep. So, and if you've ever seen a Cirque du Soleil performance, they communicate perfectly with each other, right? They don't withhold. You look at what happens in most organizations. People withhold information from each other. People don't go out of their way to help their teammates. They live and work in their own silos. All the things that Cirque du Soleil is not. And you don't see a Cirque du Soleil performer say to the guy that's flying through the air, you know what, I don't feel like catching you today. I just don't feel like it. Yeah. You know, it's Monday morning. I don't feel too good. I don't like you. You just don't see that. So when I talk to CEOs about the kind of culture they want to build, I say, you need that as the model of the culture that you want in your mind. That's sort of where you start. And you can read about this, and I think it was Blue Ocean Strategy. It was the first time I read about the Cirque du Soleil metamorphosis, if you will. It was a phenomenally brilliant strategic play because they said, we're going to and this is what I tell CEOs all the time. They said, we're going to take the parts of the circus that nobody cares about, nobody wants, and are the most expensive, by the way. We're going to eliminate them. And then we're going to build on, the experiences and kind of performances that people will want to see. And that's where we'll invest. So we'll take the money out of the low. And my analogy, is the low margin products that are going to go away at some point in time that nobody cares. I'm going to plow that money into the higher margin kind of innovative products that you want to build. So anyway, strategically, it was just a brilliant move, and it's worked quite well. But so then the response I get is, you can't expect people to feel like that. I mean, they're coming, they just want to get out and go to the bowling alley. They care more about their bowling scores than they do about the company performance. At which point I say, and whose fault is that? That you don't have an environment and an atmosphere and a culture that people want to be in, as opposed to a lot of manufacturers, not all of them, but a lot of manufacturers, they have environments and cultures that are toxic, and people don't want to be in them, but they have to be because they don't have any choice. So that's what I say, and I have a fairly specific formula that of how to get to that point through the installation of values in the company and a culture that is by design as opposed to by default. Cirque du Soleil is a design culture. That just didn't end up that way. Yeah. They designed it that way, and it's exactly what they wanted. But most organizations, they have cultures by default. If they even understand what the culture is, it's like a 4-letter word. They don't want to touch it because culture is this squishy beer and pizza for lunch crowd stuff. And lately, it's been easy for me. I wrote a white paper 6 or 8 months ago where I had a lot of research done on, the impact of culture on organization performance. And it's clear. It's very clear that really positive cultures produce positive financial results and really negative ones don't. And so I used to have to convince CEOs that culture is something they ought to pay attention to. But thank God Wells Fargo came along and defrauded 2 million customers, right? Yeah. And they claim they have. And Uber was the next one, United Airlines. Yeah. Every one of those, if you look at their value statements, they're what I call bumper sticker values on their websites, it's all what they're not. Yeah. Wells Fargo, quote unquote, does what's best for the customer. Right. That's why they cheated 2 million people. United Airlines has claims to be quote unquote caring people. Yeah, right. That's why they throw babies and women and children off of planes. Yeah. And Uber, of course, that's just a mess. Yeah.
Seriously. Yeah. So as we start to wind down, Steve, I have a few questions that I typically ask guests on the show, especially since this show is listened to more by people earlier in their careers. So For you, my first question is this. What has been the keys to your success over the years?
Well, that's a fairly easy one to answer. You work your ass off. It's I mean, that's where it starts. You work, you outwork the other guy, and don't work as much as the other guy does. Outwork the other guy. Take on all the dirty, nasty little assignments that nobody wants to touch. That way, you'll get experience and you'll get a reputation. And the third factor would be read everything you can get your hands on. Be smarter than the guy next to you because you're reading more than him and you're aware of what's happening. And then the fourth thing is you need really sharp people skills, because I don't care how smart you are, I don't care how good you are. If you can't get along exceedingly well with people in the organization, you would fail.
And what does branding mean to you in terms of personal branding and corporate branding? Because those two are a big deal these days.
Yeah, you have to do both. That's a really good question. You have to do both because, it used to be people would come to work for a company, collect a defined benefit pension and leave 30 years later. Of course, those days are long, long gone. Now the average number of jobs that a person entering the workforce today will have before he or she retires is like 15, something like that. Yeah. And you don't ever want to depend on headhunters to do anything for you, because as most people know, headhunters don't really do anything for you. They do it for the company. And so you need to be you need to be visible in the marketplace and in the space where you play and in the space where you may want to play next. And that's with personal branding. I mean, you need to have a really good website. You need to have LinkedIn, arguably, maybe Facebook, maybe not. I don't know. It depends on the industry you're in. And, of course, a Twitter account. And I have all of those, and I'm very, and so does Miller Ingenuity, and I'm very protective of my personal brand and very protective of the Miller Ingenuity brand. You don't get to change colors. You don't get to make statements. It's not, I don't get on Facebook and go, oh yeah, man, beer bong at the pool party last night. Wasn't that cool? Don't ever do that. Yeah. Don't ever put anything on your social media that isn't completely and entirely business related, because employers are watching that stuff now. Yeah. They know what your life is like just based on what you post on, and once you post it, it's there forever. Yeah.
And Steve, looking back, if you could go back in time, what would you do differently, knowing what you know now?
Well, I would have to say the one thing that I had to get it later in life. I wanted it earlier in my career. These days I have a very significant international exposure. I mean, there aren't too many countries in the world that you could name that I haven't done business in, and haven't been in, and currently do business in all over the world. I wanted to get that experience 30 years ago. I didn't end up getting it till about in the last maybe 15 years ago. And that's a piece of advice I give I asked for it. I was in the company, and I said, and we had a joint venture in China, and I used to do business over there, but I wasn't in charge of it, and I wasn't living there. And so this would have been, 30 years ago. And I said, Guy, they were looking for the next, managing director of the Shanghai operation. I said, give it to me. I want to go over there. It was a shitty assignment. I mean, it was really crappy. I mean, 30 years ago, it wasn't fashionable to have joint ventures in China. The hotel was horrible. The living conditions were brutal. And I said, let me have that, because I want to get that kind of international exposure right now, because once you have something like that, you can write your own ticket. Yeah. If I had to do over again, I'd have pushed harder on that and would have made that happen. As it turned out, I had to get it 10 years later and 15 years later in a different way. But
And I guess for my final question would be, you already alluded to this earlier in the podcast, but who are some of the people that you look up to, you study, and you try to absorb some of their thinking and wisdom as you prepare yourself to be a better, more effective CEO and entrepreneur?
Oh, for sure. The first name that comes to mind is Tony Robbins.
Tony.
You're familiar with him?
Oh, yes. I think I have a bunch of his books, too.
Yeah. I've read everything he ever wrote, and I have a journal from, I don't know, 30 years ago when I first read one of his books or went to the Firewalk or whatever it was, where I bought one of his programs. It says, here's your 12-day thing to being better. I can't remember what it was called. I went through that journal and, setting goals and all that kind of stuff. And as I look at it, so this is 30 years ago, goals I set for myself for 30 years in the future, or 20 years in the future, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. I blew by every last one of those.
Wow.
Which made me wonder, and this is the point she made me not wonder, made me conclude, you didn't set your goals high enough.
Yeah.
And everybody says that, right?
Yeah.
Everyone always says, if you set a low goal and make it, that sucks. And set a high goal and not get it, you're better off, whatever. That's all true. And the thing that I learned from Tony, there's a lot of stuff I learned from Tony, but the thing I learned that was most important from him was urgency. He's a big get it done now guy, get it done now guy, and massive action. When I have a problem I need to tackle or a opportunity I want to go, I send like a dozen B-1 bombers at it. I don't send two, I send a dozen, and that was probably the most important thing. Two most important things I learned from him. Brian Tracy, for sure. You look at some of the Jeff Bezos is an amazing strategist and an operating guy. I look at a lot of the things that he does. And, of course, Steve Jobs, from an innovative point of view. I'm not talking about his personality and how he treated people and all that kind of stuff. That was arguably not so cool. But in terms of how he thinks, how he used to think, and Jeff Bezos, he is probably the most brilliant strategist in business today.
Wow.
Everyone should study him. Everybody should study Amazon. I talk about Amazon a lot when I'm in employee meetings, and, I draw analogies between us and Amazon and what we should be doing. And in fact, if I could get a tour and get to meet some Amazon people in their development and marketing organization, but I'm sure they're not going to do it. I would love to do that.
Yeah, wow. And with that said, Steve, we've reached the end of the show. So where can people find you and learn more about you? I know you're not posting beer pong photos on Facebook.
They won't find any of those. That's what they're looking for. I would say two places. You can either go to my personal website, which is stephenlblue.com. Stephen with a V. Mm-hmm. That's the easiest to spell. And there's a link on my personal website for Miller Ingenuity, which is the other place they can find me. Of course, they can find me on Twitter. Just Google me, and they'll find me on Twitter, Facebook, and kind of all over the place.
Okay. And where can they get the new book, The Art of Success, that you co-wrote with Jack Canfield?
Just get on Amazon.
Amazon, great. And I'll link to all that in the show notes. So It's been a pleasure talking to you, Steve. I really learned a lot, and I know the listeners and the audience learned a lot too.
Well, I appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you, G. Have a good day.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the show today. If you love what you hear on today's episode of the podcast, go to iTunes and leave a review and a comment. It helps other great listeners like yourself find the show. And of course, you can always find more episodes of the Bulletproof Entrepreneur Podcast at www.odogwu.com.